Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. My name is Jamie Hinkle. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. Just like every week, we're here for something to talk about live, and I'm going to bring in Jean Marie Nevada to lead today's conversation.
Hey, Henkel, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. As fall is beginning and the temperature is no longer 117 degrees, I'm pretty excited about life.
Yeah, we are getting our last few days of sunshine before it rains for somewhere between 4 and 6 months here in Portland. Yeah.
I will see you later, Jamie. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National, and my pronouns are she and her, or ella if you're speaking Spanish. And every single week we get together to have a conversation related to LGBTQ equality. We pick a different topic every week, grab an article, write some questions, and then we invite friends to talk to us. And we are really, really glad that you're here. If you're participating live, you can certainly chat with us in the chat and comments areas from the feed that you're using. And this week's article is available online at straightforequality.org/discussion series. And it actually came from The Advocate, written by Alex Cooper. And the title of the story was, "Many gays and lesbians still don't believe that male bisexuality is real." And sort of one of the very interesting pieces from this is it addresses a new piece of research that just came out on bisexuality. And this was sort of the money quote to me. An internal meta-analysis revealed that heterosexual, lesbian, and gay participants all perceived bisexual men as more attracted to men than women. No such pattern emerged for bisexual women. In other words, on top of the fact that there's tons of bi erasure and invisibility, the default for bi men is must be gay, where that is not the case for women. And today we are having this conversation for lots of reasons, but not the least of which it is Bi Visibility Day. So happy Bi Visibility Day to everybody. And when we're talking about people who are bi, we are using that term to describe people who have the capacity to form attractions to more than one gender. You may also hear some other words used in this conversation, like pansexual, polysexual, or omnisexual too. But no matter how you identify, happy Bi Visibility Day. And to have this conversation, I am bringing in three of my colleagues from PFLAG. So let's bring in Mackenzie, Patrick, and Laura. So we have Mackenzie Hart, who is our Learning and Inclusion Coordinator at PFLAG National, Patrick Cochran, who is the Advocacy and Policy Engagement Senior Coordinator, and Laura McGinnis, the Media Relations Manager, also known as the woman who keeps me from saying stupid things to the press. And all of them identify as Bi+, and I'm so grateful for all three of you to be here. So let's get into today's conversation. So essentially, a lot of people just don't get bisexuality, even after all of this time. Lots of people inside of LGBTQ spaces, as well as outside of them, don't believe in the validity or the reality of bi identities. What do you think is going on with this? And Mackenzie, let's start with you.
Thanks so much, Jean Marie. I think that there are a lot of different potential causes here. I think chief among them is that society for basically forever has kind of persuaded us to believe that monogamy and heterosexual monogamy is the norm, at least within this country and several others around the world. And so I think that there's already a very rocky foundation to understand bi identities because it's been so ingrained into us that we are just not the norm. This is something different. This is something new. When that's just not true, there have been bi+ people throughout all of human history. I think that when we do talk about within the LGBTQ community, or in this case, the L and the G community, there's some more confusion because of that societal bias, but also because of the struggle that gay and lesbian people have had to come out themselves and to be able to express themselves and the way that they understand themselves. It's difficult to understand people who have different experiences than your own. Even for bi people, I do struggle sometimes to understand people who have different identities than what I have. And I think that we do see that here, that there is that disconnect internally, but there's also the fact that people who are gay and lesbian have had to fight to be seen as valid themselves and to understand themselves, and had to push back on so much bias that now that there is an identity that doesn't match theirs, there's that level of, I don't want to say confusion, but just a level of misunderstanding because it just doesn't align with what so much energy has gone into within this movement for so long.
Thank you. And Patrick, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think that another big problem here is that society likes to think of things in binaries. So man, woman, straight, gay doesn't leave a lot of room for the things that are in the middle. And if you want to think about bisexual people as kind of being in that middle space, it does make it hard for some people to really adjust their expectations of what that's going to be like. We really do like to put people into one of two categories. That's just kind of how people like to think about things. And when things fall outside of that, so this includes people who are bi plus, but also when we're talking about non-binary identities, when we're talking about gender, all of this kind of falls into that problem area for so many people, where they just don't get it because it isn't like a neat thing that you can put in box 1 or box 2.
Yeah, it's not black and white. It's not pink or blue. It's somewhere in between, and people just want those definitives. Laura, build on that conversation for us.
Oh yeah, I'm going to be the one who goes there too. For bisexuality too, we live in a very Puritan society that that sex is not something one should have. Period. And if you do have it, then it should be behind closed doors and all of these things. So when you have a word that even just says bi, meaning two, and sex, it's that those two things together imply that those things are happening together. So there's this assumption that people who are bisexual are also polyamorous or promiscuous. And polyamory, promiscuity, whatever, doesn't matter. None of your business. But there's an inherent judgment that happens there, and not all people who are bisexual are either of those things, and not all people who are of any other kind of sexuality are those things either. So the sex in bisexuality, especially in what Mackenzie was saying too, this kind of just it's a kind of very puritanical society that we live in, and it becomes hard to overcome.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, even the term itself. I remember a few years ago, there was sort of a trend towards let's just start saying bi more often. And I think it was an effort at getting to that, yet never actually addressing the issue that you just identified. So one of the really fascinating things about this article to me, because we've talked about bi erasure before and bi invisibility before, but this really broke out that there is a distinct difference between the way people in general, and this includes gay and lesbian people as well as heterosexual people, see bisexual men and see bisexual women. So consistently, there was this big disparity where bisexual men were essentially seen as actually gay, whereas bisexual women were actually bisexual. So this actually tells us a lot about disparities in how we understand gender, I think. And Patrick, maybe we can start with you on this one. As someone who identifies as a bi cisgender man, you've certainly encountered people who have questioned the validity of your identity. So did what was reported in this story and in this particular piece of research add some sense that the experiences that you've had are not isolated and that they're actually more common than we often think?
Well, yeah, certainly there was some of that to kind of have that be put in statistical form, that the experiences I've had with gay men, straight women, etc., who just really didn't seem to get it or really seem to like that I identify as a bi man. Putting it in statistical format does kind of give you that sort of sense. Yeah, I'm not alone. But I also, even before reading the article, have plenty of friends who are cis men who identify as bi, who have had similar experiences. It's just a very unfortunately common thing when you are a bi man in particular, that you're going to have this experience where people are just going to kind of write you off as gay, which leads to all sorts of issues when you're dating, when you're even in a relationship. All of these things really make it quite tough, which is not to say that there are not also struggles with identifying as a bi woman. But this article does really highlight on a point that bi men are really seen as not a valid identity by a whole lot of people.
Thank you. And Mackenzie, so you were assigned male at birth. You identify as non-binary. You also identify as bi plus. So you're experiencing this definitely in a different way than people who are cis and bi are. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because as I have to admit, as I was reading this and we were talking about doing this story, it kept coming into my head, and I'm like, this doesn't even address you, for example. So what is on your mind?
Totally. I mean, I think that the study itself, all studies are going to be imperfect in some ways. This does show us some statistical aspects that we need to address. So I'm not criticizing the research team here. I think that the questions were asked in the way they needed to be to get to this data. But I think that just the question itself and the assumption itself just upholds the gender binary, that the fact that people do assume that, you know, bisexuality in men is going to be different than women. They are still thinking in those two buckets when we know that those are not the only two. Not the only two buckets that exist, not the only two genders that exist. And it does have a expectation of cis normativity that people are more likely going to be cis, or cis people are the ones being addressed along those lines. And so I think that it kind of shows us not just inaccurate assumptions about bisexuality, but a lot of the continued inaccurate assumptions about gender identity and a lot of the still problematic lack of knowledge about transgender and non-binary people. What I will say about this study is that I believe it because I have experienced it. I was socially conditioned as a male for, frankly, most of my life, way more than half of my life still at this point, partially because I didn't have the words, and neither did anyone else around me. And I didn't really question that because it felt okay. I didn't feel the way that I've heard other trans people describe as feeling that, oh, something's off. For some people, I just didn't feel that, so I didn't question until I learned more words. But when I was younger, I never really even questioned my sexuality until a certain age because all the crushes I was having were on girls growing up until a certain age. And then I realized, oh, there's more, there are more genders, there are more things happening. And that's when I kind of realized that I had different words in that case. But I definitely remember early on that even in an accepting place, people might say, oh, are you gay? Sometimes trying to be accepting, sometimes bullying. And my answer was always no. And it still is because I'm not. I've never identified in that way. And so that was something that was even difficult for me in realizing the validity of bisexuality because I was conditioned in such a way that it just wasn't even an option. It wasn't even an identity that I really knew existed until a certain point. And then it took a while for me to say, oh, you know what, that does apply to me. And then other journeys along those ways. And so I do still feel that is still questioned, though I think that I'm, pushy enough about it in my personal life that a lot of people don't question me directly anymore because I have all the talking points that I have. And if they still question, they'll kind of walk away. But I have experienced that, and I have experienced kind of that erasure of being bi and non-binary that does come up, that people still have questions or still look, even in the best of scenarios.
Yeah, thank you. And Laura, so you're the bi plus woman who is on the Today Show. So as you read this, and obviously you can only speak for your own experiences, but did what you read surprise you at all, or was it pretty consistent with what you've seen? And you are an expert in communications. What do you see in terms of this conversation? Does this help the conversation? Does it give you the tools you need to have these discussions with people?
I mean, I think. Thanks, Jean Marie. I think it's really important to continue to have these conversations. It's studies like this and reporting like this happen kind of all the time. We've known for a long time that bi men exist, and but bi women have been over-sexualized, and we are expected to be, as a cisgender woman, where I know my mother turned to me when I came out to her 5 years after I came out to everybody else in the world, and said, "But you have a choice." And it's like, no, that's not how that works. And so she had to go through her journey and everything too. But I think for many people, it is more acceptable for a cis woman to experiment. And then, that's very sexualized anyway. You can go to any kind of adult anything and find that is, bisexual or whatever, that is what people are looking for. Or at least that's maybe not what people are looking for, but people are selling it. but there's a market for it for a reason. And I think that it demonstrates that there's a broader, that many more people in behind closed doors would admit that they have attractions to people of other genders or the same gender, and are kind of really, from that's something that many more people are going to admit to themselves, and only to themselves, and only in a behind closed doors kind of way, than they will publicly or talk about it, because that's, what happens in my fantasy or my imagination is one thing, but to limit the discussion to only sex is a problem. And I'm going to go there because that's where I started. So I apologize. I don't, but that, a romantic attraction is not the same as a sexual attraction, and activity, and how somebody lives their life is different from all of those things. So recognizing that your gender, your romantic attractions, and your sexual orientation are different than your sexual practice, and different from each other, or they might all be the same as each other. It's that, or have some sort of a pivot, are fine to know. So I think we are getting to a stage where we can have these conversations and have them more broadly. And to Mackenzie's point, understand that there are many more genders to appreciate, and that you can have this conversation that also defines gender differently than sexual orientation, that defines both of those different from romantic orientation, and we're able to have those conversations. So let's keep having them. And in the meantime, I'm married to another cisgender woman, and we live a lesbian lifestyle, but I am a bisexual woman, and that is how we are. And by lesbian lifestyle, it's whatever. I'm not. That is not. There's no political thing there.
You do hiking. I knew it. I knew it.
100%. I'm wearing cargo shorts.
I actually appreciate that you queued up. I can't stop laughing now. The term romantic orientation or romantic attractions. I know that's something that we've been talking a lot more about in learning inclusion. It's something that Mackenzie really introduced and brought into our conversations. And I felt at first it took a lot of explaining and going back and forth. But once I had the language, and I really appreciate that a lot of that language came out of the need to have these conversations better, I actually felt it was easier to talk about everything, because it suddenly gave you one more plane to talk about, because, sexual orientation and romantic orientation are not always the same thing. And I think this gives such great language to put the discussion around it. So I want to turn around, because, we talk a lot about invisibility and where it goes wrong, and the sexualization, particularly of bi women. I would love to talk about where it's right. So where are we seeing great examples of bi plus representation? Who is doing it well? And Mackenzie, can we start with you on this one?
Absolutely. I think that there is increasingly more and more good media, and I think that's a great thing. A few of the TV shows that I've turned to a lot that I think have really positive and accurate bi representation are shows like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which by the end of its run had 3 different bi characters who were of different genders and had different words to describe themselves. The show Madam Secretary, that was on CBS, actually had 2 bi characters in this run that were on the main cast at different times, a man and a woman, which I thought was pretty incredible, especially for a political drama that was not aimed towards a younger audience, except for me as a political nerd. And then even the show Generation, that was just on HBO Max, that was aimed to a younger audience, has been really, really good about some bi plus identities. But books and some certain celebrities exist. I read a young adult book called Only Mostly Devastated at the beginning of this year. And the protagonist was a gay teen boy. But throughout the book, a few people ended up coming out as bi, and I really wasn't necessarily expecting it to be good representation, because unfortunately, some of those tropes do fall into some problematic territory. Sally Rooney, one of the most popular authors right now, in 2 of her books, the protagonist is a bi person, and they talk about it. In the most recent one, the bi protagonist ends up with or dates another bi person, and they talk about it and have a real conversation. And so I think there are some great examples of that. But then there are some prominent figures who talk really openly about their sexuality. Janelle Monáe came out as pansexual a few years ago and talks about it a lot. Lady Gaga has consistently talked about being a bi woman throughout her career. Some other celebrities might not even label themselves, but will talk about having multi-gender attraction. And so there are a lot of different pieces of representation happening. And I do feel like I see this mostly in the music industry. That might just be my own bias because I'm such a music fan. But I see that a lot. Where I see the problem with some of that is when the reporting on it is not accurate, or when people then continue to use the word ally to describe someone who has come out as bi. And so that's where I think we can see some real improvement in the future. I think that there is now a good canon of bi inclusive content. There is now a really solid group of famous bi people, and there have been for decades. I think that some improvements into the future, that we continue having the conversations about that accurately. And I think that that is a really positive next step, to just keep that in mind, especially even in our day-to-day conversation, is making sure that we're using the language that people use to describe themselves and talking about these issues in an effective and accurate way.
I love that you brought up the point about people who have identified as bi or pan and then do not get identified as such. And I feel like Lady Gaga is one of them, that there was this point where you heard it a lot and then suddenly it disappeared and she became the greatest ally in the whole world. And I'm like, but wait, but did anyone listen to what she said? Patrick, what do you think? Where are people getting it right? What makes you really excited and happy to see?
Yeah, so there are a few spaces where I think people are doing a good job. I will give a shout out to our own PFLAG book club, where we read America Is Not the Heart, which is a great book. The protagonist is a Filipina woman who is bisexual and talks a lot about her romantic and sexual experiences with both men and women. And I thought it was just a great book. And it was so cool to kind of have a book, because a lot of times when you're talking about queer media in general, but in books as well, where the queer characters are, usually gay, and let's face it, usually gay men. So I think it was great to kind of see A, that the protagonist was not a man, B, the protagonist was not white, and C, the protagonist was openly bisexual, was not gay or straight, fell right there in the middle. So I did love to see that. I think that in work, when we're talking about, in your work, we did get to go to this great conference out in Equal, where we did have a bisexual workshop where Robin Oakes led it. And she is a great bisexual activist. I thought that it was great to see queer organizations kind of create a space for bi plus people to talk openly about their experiences, talk about these same sorts of issues that we're talking about right now. Places where we have good representation, places where we don't. Why bi plus people get erased so often. So I really appreciated that in kind of my work life. And I will say to kind of look ahead. I really do think that it is important for bi plus people, but then everyone else, to kind of really examine characters and representation that we thought of as being specifically gay representation, and go, oh no, actually this person is bisexual actively. I think I talked about this when we did our STTA last year, but like everybody who goes and watches Brokeback Mountain talks about the gay cowboy movie. Sorry, those cowboys are bisexual. They have relationships with men and women throughout the entire movie. So I think that part of sort of building a more visible bisexual future has to be really kind of claiming these representations that already exist. It's just that they've been sort of mislabeled. So I think undoing the mislabeling would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Laura, who in your universe is getting it right, and what makes you happy to see?
I mean, always my universe is Wonder Woman. So anything.
Who tweeted today? DC Comics tweeted.
Yeah, I mean, I also gravitate to different books and seeking out characters and folks who either represent me or just represent a queer experience. So the American Library Association has its Rainbow Book List that comes out every year that you can find books that have not just bisexual characters but queer characters, and you can really dig through and find some great literature there, or really not great literature, and that's fine too. And the author and young adult fiction critic who focuses on queer lit, Lee Wind at leewind.org. It's he has an archive of like 1,100 different books, and you can go through his archive of like book reviews of queer young adult literature, and you can go through the archives and say, hey, I want a bisexual main character who's in sports, and or whatever.
That is a database.
It's really deep. And the archive itself is there. They from March of this year, but it's there, and there are tons of just great novels and characters. And then there's a lot happening in television now, so check it out, especially especially in like cartoon shows or animated stuff, things for adults, things for kids, and I don't know, Trollstopia even. So there's just a lot to look for, but I will always and forever just turn to Diana. And that I married somebody named Diana, that's a totally unrelated thing, but 100% Wonder Woman here. No, it's not.
Is it unrelated? No, it's not.
No.
Wonder Woman is always a good place to land. I actually have a question for all of you that I'll admit I did not think of until we were having this conversation, which is this research gave us something, obviously a discussion to have here. Are there other kinds of, are there other topics around bisexuality and around bi identities that you think we need more research on? Are there any topics that you think if we had more data around this would make these conversations easier, or it would facilitate conversations that we need to have? Does anyone have anything on that? And now I have the moment of horror when no one answers me.
I think that there just needs to be more research in general. Bi-specific research, just doesn't get funded to the same level as even general LGBTQ research. Sorry, oh my God. So I think that we have some research throughout, and we have some examples of disparities that bi people face. We have studies like these about some views on bi people, but what I think we really need, and this is kind of vague, we just need a much bigger, well-funded major research study that kind of tries to cover all of it in the same vein as NCTE's trans survey, for example, to just try to hit all of it at once, so we do have some baselines to make sure that we have an update.
Thank you. And while I am talking to you, Mackenzie, I was wondering if you could tell everybody who's watching about the two great PFLAG Academy online sessions that you've created for us. The second part was offered last night, but they're both available online. So could you tell people a little bit about them? And I think Jamie is going to share how people can get to them.
Yes, so we have our monthly PFLAG Academy online in July, and then again last night. We had a Bisexual 101 training, and then last night we had our Bisexual 201 training. And these are kind of set to be the start to your journey on being a better bi ally. So the first training focused a lot on some research that we do have and recapping terminology, as well as questions that we can all ask ourselves as we try to become better allies. I highly recommend that, and we have some resources alongside that presentation. And then the 201 training talks a lot about some of the myths that each of us kind of alluded to throughout, especially Laura and some of her comments, and some ways to unpack those myths, as well as to continue to be a good ally. I would also shout out our What the Plus training, which talks about more expansive LGBTQ identities and kind of puts bisexuality plus in conversation with asexuality and other identities. So there are some really great options there. And if you head to the pflag.org/online academy, like Jamie shared, you can find them all.
Thank you so much. And we are almost out of time again. It happens every week so quickly. Thank you, Mackenzie and Laura and Patrick. Happy Bi Visibility Day. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. Well, everybody, that brings us to the end of yet another show. That one was really interesting. As usual, I wish we had more time. But we'll be back next week with another conversation for you. So until then, we leave you the same way every single week, reminding you to run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, be kind. And please, if you have not done it yet, please get yourself vaccinated. If you need any help between now and next week when we're together again, please visit pflag.org to get resources or find your local chapter. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you again next week on Something to Talk About Live. Bye.